network to the world. Subscribe now to the Hot 97 YouTube channel. It's Ebro in the Morning with Laura Stiles and Rosenberg.
It's Ebro in the Morning, Laura Stiles, Rosenberg on assignment today. We have Shawnee Benton Gibson and Tonya Lewis Lee with us today. Tonya and Shawnee, how you guys doing today?
Doing great. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
Good morning. Good to see you.
Shawnee, before we come to you, I would love to start with Tonya Lewis Lee, because you are helping Shawnee bring this conversation to light. And I know once we really get into this conversation around what Black women are dealing with in maternity, in our medical system, and all of the loss of life, the lack of research, the lack of care, the lack of listening that has taken place in our medical system around birthing mothers, and just it's traumatic. I mean, when you get into the numbers, it's very traumatic. But I wanted to start with this documentary, Aftershock, and why this was important for you, Tonya, to lean in here.
Well, I think it's just what you just said. It is traumatic. The numbers are disheartening. Black women are dying at 3 to 4 times the rate of white women in this country. The U.S. has a U.S. maternal mortality crisis. Women die in general at higher rates than other women in industrialized nations. We are the worst country in the industrialized world in which to give birth. And I wanted to tell this story because I wanted to save lives. I wanted to raise awareness about the issue out here. I wanted to talk about and actually discover and learn for myself why it was happening, and why it was happening to Black women more than it was happening to the rest of the population, and what the solutions are out there. And the good news is that I do believe that there are solutions. We don't have to be here. This is not one of those crises that cannot be fixed. And because of people like Shawnee and the work that she's doing, I think I do remain a bit optimistic that we can get there.
Tonya, is it as simple as the blatant disregard for and the lack of protection and care for Black women, and the fact that when there's a problem in American society, always our people get it the worst?
Absolutely. I mean, we can look at the statistics and know that this is an issue of race. Socioeconomics, education level does not change the rate for Black women. A Black woman who has a graduate degree still has a higher chance of dying from childbirth complications than a white woman living closer to the poverty line. And so what we're seeing is that it really is about women not being seen and heard. We have an over-medicalization of birth. The way we think about birthing in this country is a little backwards. So what happens is when women present and they're pregnant, we treat it as if it's a disease instead of a regular occurrence. And so we over-medicalize. Most obstetricians haven't seen a natural physiological birth that does not include some sort of medical intervention. But then on the other side, in postpartum, we intervene too little too late. So you have too much too soon or too little too late. And we're the ones that are not being heard and listened to when we complain or want to even choose to give birth in different ways.
And then you factor in the disproportionate, lack of healthcare, lack of finances, and our medical system here in the United States is so tied to, just like everything else in a capitalist society, so tied to how much money you make. But even still, if you are a wealthy Black woman, we saw the story with Serena Williams.
Absolutely.
Where during, she has all the resources, all the support, all the money, and still dealt with people not listening to her doctors not listening to her.
And I also just want to add to that, we even in our communities, we're living in quote unquote gentrified communities these days, but we still have hospitals that are underfunded, that do not have the resources necessary to take care of people when they're in dire need. So that's also a critical piece to this as well.
Shawnee, talk us through Aftershock, the documentary, how your relationship with Tonya Lewis came together, and how you got to this place.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity to share. So I was approached 2 months after the transition of my daughter, Shawnee, She died due to a birth-related pulmonary embolism in 2019. And we were planning an event around her birthday. She died in October. Her birthday was in December. Our family, we're artists. We, work a lot in the community, activism, advocacy. And so we were planning on doing something to celebrate her life and to educate the community about the scourge of maternal mortality in the Black community. And so a few days before the event was scheduled to launch, I got a phone call, didn't recognize the number, but was compelled to pick it up. And that's not me, really. I'm like, if I don't recognize the number, I don't do that. But Spirit said, pick it up. So I picked up, and there was this voice of a white woman, or it sounded like a white woman on the other end, sharing her name. And now we know her as Paula Eiselt, who is the co-director of the film, asking me about my experience with the loss and asking if it was possible for her to come with a team to film at the Aftershock event, because Aftershock, the documentary, is named after the original Aftershock event that we did back in 2019 for the first time. So, I was just moved. I'm like, this is a sign from my daughter. This opportunity will provide, if nothing else, a capturing of that gathering of community. And so I said yes to her coming with the team. And the rest is history. She came. She was blown away by what we put together. It was a compilation of our artistic gifts and mindset, our spiritual practice as a family and community, a conversation of intellectual conversation about the issues with Black maternal health and the crisis in the United States, and just a co-creation that was just so powerful. And she was like, please, will you let us follow your family as part of the documentary? And I don't think I said yes that night, but later on when we spoke again, I consented. And I think, Tonya, you can correct me if I'm wrong. You were originally going to be a producer of the documentary and not the co-director of the documentary. But I'm just going to make it as plain as I can make it. There was a necessity to have the anti-racist lens through a Black embodied person inside of the project, guiding the story, because Paul is a Jewish woman. Her reality and her circumstances are different. And so Tonya's voice, Tonya's experience, Tonya's Blackness and realness had to be a part of the co-creation of the documentary. And I'm so grateful that we went in that direction. And like I said, the rest is history.
How many families did you guys follow along for the documentary?
We followed Shawnee and Amari, and then we followed the family of Amber Rose Isaac, Bruce McIntyre, and then Omari as an artist paints images of other women who've passed away from childbirth complications. So through Omari, we got the chance to meet a couple of other men as well, but we really followed Amber's family and Shimani's family most closely.
The documentary, where can people see this documentary?
Aftershock is currently streaming on Hulu, so please go check it out. And we want the documentary to be a conversation starter. It is the beginning of a way of thinking about birthing in this country. I think we really need to shift the culture of birthing and the way we think about it. So I really want people to come away and debate and talk about it after they see it.
When my daughter was on her way, my mom told me stories about how birthing was for women in America in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, where basically women wouldn't even remember that they had a child, and there was no one allowed in the room with women when they were having children. And there was this whole thing in California of women, and that's how there began to become this movement to make sure that other people were present in the in the birthing moment when the child was being delivered. And this country, as you pointed out, Tonya, has always had it very backwards with regard to women in general having children in this country. And so I want to circle back to just specifically what that meant for Black women. There was no regard, there was no support, right, for the population of formerly enslaved African people in this country when it became time for them to have children. It just wasn't a part of the fabric of this nation. So fast forward to now, it's sad, but it's almost like a prophecy fulfilled that we would be here today in 2022, right? Still having to fight for Black women and Black children to be taken care of and protected like other populations in our society. Shawnee, what is that experience been like for you? Because I'm sure that's what this documentary is about, for you to help other people learn, what to look for, but also B, people who went through what you went through and how to cope.
Yeah, thank you for where you started. Just to rob women of their agency, to be awake and aware and present during a major rite of passage in their lives. Giving birth is a rite of passage. To not experience the fullness of your body, and our bodies are magical, they're powerful, they know just what to do. And that's, as a result of patriarchy. I call them the two twins. White supremacy and patriarchy will dictate that a woman doesn't have to be present, that she's just a vessel, a lump of flesh that brings new life through the world, and we don't have to value her or her thoughts about it. And then she can just wake up and then we hand her a baby and hope that the baby's actually hers. And that's a whole different story. Yeah. When I think about the many stories that are not told, like Shimani's story, tragic as it is being spoken and told. Her name is being called. But when I think about our enslaved ancestors, when I think about Anarcha, Lucy, and Betsy, who were tortured so that J. Marion Sims could figure out how our magical wombs worked, and how to figure out how to do surgery and navigate that with no anesthesia. This is the stain, the scar on these United States that has never been owned up to fully. And we had to do research, like, to me, it's common sense, but all this research had to be done to declare that the reason why Black and brown women are dying is not because we're irresponsible, not because we're low vibrational in reference to what we eat and what we take in. It's the weathering, and that's a term inside of the reproductive justice community, the weathering on our bodies due to the day-to-day experiences of racism and oppression, and the oppressive nature of power and privilege from the dominant culture that has us not feeling connected to our bodies and feeling dis-ease mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and physically. And that's not on us. So it's really important for this story and many stories like it. Like, I want the women, not just the Serena's, also Beyonce had a near-death experience giving birth to her twins.
Right.
I don't want those stories to be the stories that are told only, or Shimani's even. I want the story about the woman who has extra weight on her body, that has diabetes, that lives in public housing. Those stories are just as valuable, and those wombs are just as important, and those babies and those birthing people, as a Serena and as a Beyonce, or I forget the sister's name, forgive me, but the sister that is married to John Legend that just experienced a loss too.
Chrissy Teigen.
Yeah, Chrissy Teigen. We pay attention to those folks, and we have sympathy and empathy for those folks, but we don't have sympathy and empathy for the neighbor that lives next door. And it's a damn shame, and it has to stop.
I will say, I feel like these conversations are so important. As a first-time mother, I remember I was lucky enough to have very strong women that guided me, because at a moment you feel so vulnerable, and especially if you don't have somebody who's helping you. But I had to learn that I could say no, that I could question my doctor, that I could refuse certain things, that I needed certain explanations, and that also that I could change my doctor if I didn't feel comfortable. And I was able enough to talk to my other girlfriends who were going through similar situations. And like you said, my girlfriends that are not as financially able to get a certain type of access. But when I would hear them feeling like, I feel cold, I feel like I'm just a number, I feel like they're not listening to me, just helping them and advocating for them to be like, no, if somebody is not meeting your expectations, you can change your doctor. Until finally she was able to find a wonderful Black woman who guided her through her birthing process, and ended up being like, it was night and day the way she went through her birthing process. But it's so important, because I feel like a lot of women feel like once you have your doctor, you don't really have a choice. You kind of have to stick it through because it's so new for you.
I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think that's really critical. One of the things we cover in the film is the eradication of the midwife. A lot of women don't go to midwives. The United States does not have midwifery care integrated into its healthcare system. All other industrialized nations have midwives. The fact that midwives have been eradicated is based on a racist premise. When modern medicine came in, they took the economy of birthing out of the hands of Black women. They put it into white doctors and pushed us all into hospitals. Again, so we get into this over medicalization, but really birthing should be a woman-centered, and I say woman-centered, one could say birthing person-centered process where the birthing person chooses everyone they want to have around them, the kind of support they want, the environment they want to have a baby in. You don't necessarily have to go to a hospital. If that's where you want to give birth, you should. But if you want to give birth in a birthing center, there should be a beautiful birthing center available to you. If you want to give birth at home, you should be able to do that with the kind of support around you. And I think we will see better birthing outcomes when women can sort of dictate. And what you said about if even 35 weeks in, you're not really happy with your doctor, you should go and be a consumer and find somebody who you feel comfortable giving birth to, who is listening to you and your desires and needs.
I was, I guess, fortunate to be 40 years old when I decided to have my first child. And I guess, you know, from being raised by the number of women who raised me, I knew that as a man, I needed to lock in, tune in, and hit those classes, right? And so for the fellas too, this conversation is very important because you need to know and you need to be on the front lines as a support system and as someone who can really uphold these ladies in this moment of need and know how their body works. You know, the other thing that was a huge, I had no idea as a man, right? Because you're not tuned in as a young man to how the woman's body really works. And so now you're about to have a child and you're going to these classes and you learn that women don't even know how their body works. Right. They weren't taught. They weren't taught about colostrum and oxytocin and the different hormones that are going on and, you know, the active birth process and like, they weren't taught about it. So I'm sitting in classes and sometimes as the only guy with women who I'm learning the same things they're learning at the same time. And it really paid dividends when it was time for my daughter to, land on planet Earth because I was able to support her mom and deliver her. It was just me and her mom because the active birth process happened so fast. I ended up having to deliver my child on 911 with the operator on 911 until the ambulance got there. And if I hadn't been in those classes and knew the things to do and not to do, it could have probably been a very scary situation, but it was a calm one. And we got it done. But fellas, you gotta get to these classes and you gotta learn right along with your partner. You have to.
Yeah. I love what you just shared, brother, because we are here to live interdependently. And when we operate as if we're independent and separate, then we miss out on the opportunities to really co-create and to have fullness in life. And we are in a country that focuses so much on the over-sexualization of the body, especially Black women's bodies. We are viewed in the narrative is that we're overly sexualized, that's the only value that we have, that we're angry. So there's all these layers of belief that would have folks dismiss our experiences. And I'm not saying our white counterparts know more about their bodies and how they work or what birthing means than that they know more than we do, because I feel like it's been made up to be a mystery. But this is a natural rite of passage, as I mentioned earlier. This is a process of knowing thyself on a deep level. Knowing thyself meaning we were in the womb space before we emerged from into life and started to live, and that the perpetuation of life means we need to know and understand interdependently what this all means. And it's sad that we don't have rites of passage, that there's this over sexualization of everything. Sex sells everything, but there's a resistance and just a resistance around teaching our kids at an early age how their bodies work. My daughter Shawnee started her cycle when she was 8 years old. You don't wait until they're about to co-create with someone to start talking about how the body.
You got to start right then. You got to start
Absolutely.
right then, and you have to not only demystify it, but you have to make it a learning process. It's because it's not about sexualization. This is a natural thing that that animals do to bring new life, and that it doesn't have to be this taboo. Like as you pointed out, this over sexualized situation. It can be very, biological and a great healthy conversation about how the body works. It's a part of it is another what I feel is if you look at how we are in our culture, and I think, and this may be many cultures around the world, but let's specifically American culture, we give so much of our power away to different entities for their financial gain. Right. And so this is another one of those aspects where we are not taught because people have relied on these systems to take care of them and basically given their power away. Right. And so now when you're trying to understand what's going on with your body, what you should be doing, should not be doing, and more specifically, what is best for you and makes you happiest, fulfilled, and comfortable, you don't even know where to begin because for so many generations and in so many cultures, we have given our power away to other entities.
Well, I would say again, it was taken, right? I mean, again,
Right.
we had it. We had midwives
True.
who were there, who were educating us about our bodies from, as Shawnee says, from the beginning of our cycles to the end of our cycles, right? I mean, we don't even talk about what as women age and menopause, God forbid you say the word, no one wants to even have the conversation, but we've been, that was co-opted and taken from us. And so I think, we are in a moment where as we begin to be able to learn more about who we were and who we've been, maybe we can go a little bit back to that. Like I talk about it sort of like farm to table, right? We knew we moved far away from our food source and we had to go back to local food and that would be better for us. Well, maybe we need to go back a little bit. I mean, as Shawnee was talking about, how we learn about things, there's a spiritual aspect to birthing and bringing life to this world, which has been completely wiped out without
Right.
the midwives. When we go into cold places like hospitals to give birth with doctors who are looking for a problem, there's no way to even connect to the spiritual aspect of bringing a life into this world. And again, that was intentionally taken away from us as Black people. That's too much power. But I think we're in a time and a space where we can learn more and hopefully we can bring more midwives into the workforce. We can bring more Black doctors into the workforce. We can have more doulas in the workforce that can, maybe bring us back a little bit to the true humanity of birthing.
I love that. Tonya Lewis Lee, Shawnee Benton Gibson, the documentary on Hulu right now, Aftershock. As this, because over this I think we've seen Vice President Kamala Harris talking about this. Obviously, you brought up Beyonce, you're bringing up Serena Williams. Do you guys feel like this conversation is mainstreaming? And in your experience around this documentary, what are you seeing? What are other places people can go look for support and learning to keep this conversation going? Let's start with you, Shawnee.
Sure. So I absolutely believe that the conversation is mainstreaming. I'm hearing from people in corporate spaces about the need to show the documentary, places like Verizon and CVS and tech corporations that are reaching out to me, to members of this collective that we've established for Aftershock, to ask how they can show the film and engage in conversation. It's been a buildup. And one of the things that I want to make sure that I'm responsible for saying for myself and for Tonya is that this didn't start with the two of us, right? That this has been a conversation, a movement that has been mounting with midwives, with birth advocates, with folks who are anti-racist activists for decades. And now it's gaining momentum. And we're going to make sure that we keep the names and the experience alive. And I wouldn't be here if I didn't have hope and a belief that we can make a difference. And before my daughter passed away, I don't know if it's clear for everyone, I was in this work. And that's what made it like very jarring that my daughter died, even though I'm an activist, I'm educated, I was doing conferences around this for years. And here she is passing away. And I'm like, what I made the point to recognize for myself and share with others is that she was a Black woman. Why would I think that she was exempt? And knowledge is not enough. And we share that in the film. You have to know and act, and the systems have to transform to support. It's interdependent action and collective impact that's going to make a difference. So I'll continue to do my support groups for those who have experienced loss, but my hope is that that will become obsolete because we've done as much as we can to give people agency and power to choose, and brought back the originators of the birthing experience and the catching of the babies into the conversation so that we can live and thrive as BIPOC folks and white folks too, because they're dying as well.
And Tonya?
Yeah, well, I would say that with the overturning of Roe versus Wade, I think that it's really important that this conversation around Black women's maternal health is part of that conversation. So I do think that we are beginning, or mainstream is catching up to this conversation, because a lot of people didn't know what was going on, even though, as Shawnee said, there have been people who've been doing this work, thank God, for so long. But I think with the overturning of Roe versus Wade, that we all have to understand that maternal health care is abortion care, is all of it. That the conversation around abortion care really comes from, again, Black women. We never had autonomy over our bodies when we came to this country. Abortion was not legal for Black women in 1800, as people are now saying that abortion was legal in 1800, not for us. And so, you know, as we continue these conversations, Black women need to be centered. We need to make sure that we are centered, that this conversation is not co-opted, because white women are not doing so well in this country either. I just want to remind people of that. You know, we're talking about a disparity and an inequity, but we must remain centered in this conversation, because when you make it better for those of us who are most vulnerable, we will make it better for everybody.
Facts. You guys, the Aftershock documentary is on Hulu.
Go watch it. Go support.
Tonya Lewis Lee and Shawnee Benton Gibson, thank you for continuing the conversation and putting this forward and being on the front lines of this and helping this conversation hopefully find more solutions.
Yes.
Sure.
Thank you for the conversation.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Enjoy your day as much as possible. All right. God bless.
Bye-bye.